The night was calm, deceptively so. The air carried the sharp bite of early September, the kind that settles deep in the bones. In the distance, a lone car rumbled past, its headlights slicing through the darkness, oblivious to the scene of horror just beyond the trees. Here, on the side of a lonely stretch of the Garden State Parkway, a woman lay dead, 2 gunshot wounds, no witnesses, no weapon, and a husband, sprawled in the dirt, claiming he never saw it coming. A tragic roadside attack? Or a carefully orchestrated plan? A grieving husband, a casino fortune gone, and a trail of lies that would lead investigators deep into a network of deception, infidelity, and murder. A shocking betrayal that took 30 years to unravel. This is the story of Alvaro Caldwell and the wife he was desperate to erase. Stay with us. Alvaro Caldwell was a man who understood appearances. A polished insurance broker, a respected figure in his New Jersey community, and a husband of nearly 2 decades. He spoke with confidence, the kind that assured clients their investments were safe in his hands. He was the chairman of the Ocean County chapter of the United Way Fund, known for raising thousands for charity, shaking hands with dignitaries, and ensuring his reputation remained untarnished. He was seen as a provider, a man who had built a comfortable life for his family, a man who knew how to make things work in his favor. To those on the outside, he had it all. A beautiful home in Tom's River, a successful career, 3 sons who adored him. And then there was his wife, Angela Caldwell. To her friends, she was a devoted mother, a woman who put family first. She filled their home with warmth, organizing school events, supporting her husband's career, and ensuring that their 3 boys were raised with love and discipline. Angela was elegant, poised, the kind of woman who carried herself with grace, but never hesitated to speak her mind. She had stood by Alvaro's side for years, believing in the life they had built together, never suspecting that the man she shared her home with had grown tired of her. Alvaro was restless. The walls of his marriage no longer held the same appeal. He had started craving something else, something that Angela could not provide. Not because she wasn't willing, but because he no longer wanted her to. His affections had shifted, his attention drawn elsewhere. And the woman who now occupied his thoughts was Jessica Lane, a vice principal at Pinelands Regional High School in Tuckerton. A woman nearly 10 years younger than Angela, confident, ambitious, someone who made Alvaro feel like a man who could start over, who could shed the weight of his current life and step into something new. The affair had begun subtly, a few conversations that stretched too long, glances that lingered, meetings that became routine. Jessica was drawn to him. He had power, influence, and he knew how to make her feel special. She was tired of her own mundane reality, and Alvaro offered an escape. What started as secret rendezvous turned into something more obsessive. Alvaro confided in her, whispering frustrations about his marriage, about Angela, about how he felt trapped. And eventually, he told her what he wanted. He wanted Angela gone. Alvaro spoke of it not as an emotional plea, but as a calculated decision. If Angela was no longer in the picture, he would be free. There would be no messy divorce, no division of assets, no difficult questions from his sons, and there was the money. Her life insurance policy, worth a staggering $1.5 million. Money that could erase his mounting debts. Money that could secure his future with Jessica. Money that could solve everything. Angela was unaware of the shift in her husband's mind. She continued to be the loving wife, the devoted mother, the woman who trusted Alvaro without hesitation. She had no idea that as she planned family vacations and helped their children with schoolwork, Alvaro was looking for men who were willing to take her life in exchange for cash. Jessica, on the other hand, began to pull back. What had once been an exciting, passionate affair was beginning to suffocate her. Alvaro's obsession with eliminating Angela was no longer just words spoken in secrecy. It was becoming real. And real meant dangerous. She started to see a side of him that unsettled her. The urgency in his voice, the way he talked about the future as if Angela was already gone. Jessica had wanted excitement, but she hadn't signed up for this. She began distancing herself, making excuses, withdrawing from the fantasy they had built together. Alvaro, however, was undeterred. If Jessica was slipping away, he wouldn't let it be for nothing. He had already set things in motion, and he wouldn't stop now. He was running out of patience, and Angela's life was running out of time. By 1984, Alvaro Caldwell's life was unraveling. The polished exterior he had so carefully built, a respected insurance broker, a devoted father, a community leader, was beginning to crack. The debts were mounting. A once thriving career had become a web of financial strain, his expenses outpacing his earnings. The house, the cars, the reputation, everything he had worked for now rested on an unstable foundation. And Alvaro knew, without a doubt, that his wife Angela was standing in the way of the solution. The $1.5 million life insurance policy he had taken out on her was no longer just a safeguard. It was his way out. The key to resetting his life. The key to ensuring he never had to explain his financial failures. And the key to keeping Jessica Lane in his arms. But money alone was not enough. He needed time, freedom, and above all, he needed to make sure Angela never stood in his way again. And so Alvaro continued planning. The first step of finding the right people was not easy. Alvaro wasn't the type to frequent criminal circles, but he knew that money had a way of turning hands in the right direction. He made discreet inquiries, subtle conversations with men who knew other men. Through these connections, he found them, shady figures who lived in the underbelly of society, men whose morals were flexible, provided the price was right. The instructions were simple. Follow Angela. Learn her routines. Look for weaknesses in her daily patterns, vulnerabilities that could be exploited. Alvaro paid them well, expecting results. But the men he hired were unreliable, more interested in easy money than in carrying out a calculated plan. Days turned into weeks, and nothing happened. Angela went about her life, unaware that strangers had been watching her, waiting for the right moment, one that never came. Alvaro grew impatient. He had been assured that this would be simple, that his troubles would soon be over. But nothing had changed. The money had been wasted, and Angela was still very much alive. He realized he needed to take matters into his own hands. If hiring strangers wouldn't work, perhaps fate could be manipulated. Accidents happened all the time. A misplaced step, a moment of distraction on the road, life was fragile, and death could come unexpectedly. Or at least, it could appear that way. Alvaro formulated a new plan, a staged accident. The details were carefully arranged. A drive along a quiet road, a moment where Angela would be in the passenger seat, where the car would veer just slightly off the edge. A crash, violent enough to take her life, but controlled enough to leave Alvaro unharmed. It would be tragic, but it would be explainable. An unfortunate event, a momentary lapse in judgment. And then, in the wake of grief, the insurance money would come. The debts would be erased, and he would be free. But when the moment arrived, something stopped him. Perhaps it was fear. Perhaps it was the knowledge that even the most well-crafted accident could be questioned, investigated, unraveled. Or perhaps, in that instant, he wasn't as certain as he thought. Either way, the car never swerved. Angela never felt the danger lurking beside her. And Alvaro was left once again with a plan that had failed. The frustration was mounting. He had spent months trying to find a way, but every attempt collapsed before it could take shape. And then a thought crossed his mind, one that required no outside help, no elaborate staging. A method so simple, so effective, it had been used for centuries. Poison. It would take only one meal, one carefully placed substance in her food or drink. A few hours, and she would begin to weaken. By the time she was taken to the hospital, it would be too late. And with no signs of struggle, no clear external wounds, it would be written off as a medical tragedy. The opportunity came one evening at home. Angela had just returned from running errands. The house was quiet. The children were occupied elsewhere. Alvaro prepared dinner, moving methodically, his mind steady, his hands precise. And then, at the final moment, when he should have followed through, something changed. Perhaps it was the sudden realization of what he was about to do. Perhaps it was the weight of knowing that if she faltered, if she gasped for air, if she looked into his eyes in those final moments, he would be the last person she saw. Whatever it was, it made him stop. The poison was never used. Angela ate her meal without hesitation, never knowing that moments earlier, her husband had held her fate in his hands and chosen, for now, to let her live. But Alvaro's mind was already beyond these failed attempts. He had not abandoned his mission. He had only realized that he needed a different approach, one that didn't rely on accidents, on hesitation, on the limits of his own resolve. If he was going to succeed, He needed someone willing to carry it through, with no doubts, no reluctance, no second thoughts. And that was when he made the most critical decision yet. He would not rely on shadows. He would not attempt another staged accident or a method that required patience. He would find professionals. And this time, there would be no failure. The next time he made a move, it would be the last. Through it all, Jessica Lane remained silent. What did she know? How much had he told her? Had she listened to his words and ignored the warnings? Or had she understood what was coming and chosen instead to quietly walk away before it reached the point of no return? That question, like so many others, would remain unanswered. The night of September 7, 1984, began like many others. Alvaro Caldwell and his wife, Angela, arrived at Harrah's Casino in Atlantic City, a place they had visited many times before. The lights were bright, the energy in the air thick with excitement. Dealers shuffled cards, chips clattered against green felt, and the occasional outburst of joy signaled a lucky hand. To anyone watching, they were just another couple enjoying an evening out, blending seamlessly into the crowd. Angela was in high spirits. She had always enjoyed their trips to Atlantic City, the brief escape from the routine of daily life. She smiled, sipped her drink, and leaned over to watch as Alvaro played hand after hand at the blackjack table. He was focused, calculating, carefully placing his bets. But while Angela enjoyed the moment, Alvaro's mind was elsewhere. He had planned every step of the evening, down to the last detail. The night unfolded as expected. They dined, they played, and by the time they cashed out, Alvaro held on to a sizable sum, $15,000 in winnings. To Angela, it was a stroke of luck, an unexpected windfall. To Alvaro, it was just another element of the plan. As the hour grew late, they made their way to the car. The drive home along the Garden State Parkway was familiar, routine. Angela, sitting in the passenger seat, let herself relax. The casino lights faded behind them, replaced by the long, empty stretches of road cutting through the New Jersey pines. She had no reason to be uneasy, no reason to question the man beside her. But Alvaro was waiting for the right moment. Somewhere near the Oyster Creek picnic area, he slowed the car, his expression carefully neutral. He turned to Angela and mentioned a vibration, something off about the right rear tire. Perhaps a slow leak, nothing too serious, but something worth checking before they went any farther. She trusted him, as she always had. And so, when he pulled over into the empty rest area, she thought nothing of it. It was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that stretches unnaturally in the dead of night. No other cars, no movement, just the distant hum of the highway beyond the trees. Alvaro stepped out first, walking around to the passenger side, inspecting the tire with the casual ease of a man who had done this before. Angela remained in the car, waiting, patient. Then, everything happened quickly. Alvaro later claimed that he never saw them coming. That as he bent down to check the tire, a sudden, forceful blow struck the back of his head. That the world went dark, that he was out before he even had a chance to react. But when he woke up, when his eyes adjusted to the dim glow of the dashboard lights, Angela was no longer sitting beside him the way she had been moments before. She was slumped over the front seat, unmoving. And then he saw the blood. 2 gunshot wounds, one to the chest, another to the back of the head. The smell of gunpowder still lingered in the cool night air. Her purse lay beside her, undisturbed. The $15,000 in casino winnings, gone. The supposed attackers had taken the money and vanished into the night, leaving behind only death and silence. Alvaro, dazed, confused, his head pounding, reached for Angela, but she did not stir. He staggered from the car, his voice breaking the quiet, calling for help. But there was no one, not out here, not at this hour. Minutes passed before headlights appeared in the distance, before someone, anyone, saw him standing at the edge of the road, waving frantically, desperate. The police were called. The questions began immediately. The robbery had been brutal, efficient. But something was missing, something that didn't quite fit. Angela was dead, but Alvaro was alive, with only a bump on the head. And for the officers who arrived that night, that detail would be the first of many that didn't make sense. In the early hours of September 8, 1984, the crime scene was still active. The body of Angela Caldwell remained where it had fallen, draped over the passenger seat of the Oldsmobile. The air was cool, heavy with the scent of pine and spent gunpowder. Flashing lights cut through the darkness, illuminating the faces of officers as they surveyed the scene. And standing at the edge of it all was Alvaro Caldwell, his clothes disheveled, his hand pressed to the back of his head where he claimed he had been struck. The officers listened as he recounted the events of the night, how he and Angela had spent the evening at Harrah's casino, how they had won a considerable sum of money, how on their way home he noticed a problem with the car and pulled over, how the attack had come suddenly, without warning, how he had blacked out, and how, when he woke, his wife was dead. But something felt off. The robbery had been too clean, too precise gunshots, no sign of struggle. The cash taken, but Angela's purse left untouched, and Alvaro, despite claiming to have been knocked unconscious, bore only a minor wound. The officers asked him to recall the moments leading up to the attack, the details, the exact sequence of events. But each time there were inconsistencies, small, but there, enough to raise questions. It wasn't long before detectives took over the case. And as they began to dig, the cracks in Alvaro's story widened. The first red flag came when investigators examined the crime scene more closely. There was no evidence of a violent struggle, no signs of a scuffle in the dirt beside the car. If Alvaro had been attacked from behind with enough force to render him unconscious, why was there no trace of it? And why had the supposed killers only taken the casino winnings and nothing else? Then there was the matter of Alvaro's financials. A routine examination of his records revealed something unusual. Large sums of money had been withdrawn in the months leading up to Angela's murder. Transactions that didn't align with his normal spending habits. The investigators pressed further, tracing the withdrawals, looking for a destination. And soon, a pattern emerged. The money hadn't simply disappeared. It had changed hands. And some of those hands belonged to men with criminal records. Detectives turned their attention to a particular set of transactions. Funds wired to accounts in Louisiana, withdrawals made in locations known for illicit dealings. The name that surfaced again and again was Robert Cumber, a man with connections to organized crime in the South. A man who, when questioned, refused to say a word. But others did. It was a man named Billy Wayne McKinnon, a former sheriff's deputy from Greenwood, Louisiana, who finally cracked. He had been approached, he said, by Alvaro Caldwell himself. The offer was clear. Find someone to take care of a problem. The problem, of course, was Angela. McKinnon hadn't pulled the trigger, but he knew who had. A man named Larry Thompson, a hitman who had carried out the execution at the rest stop that night. Thompson, however, had a solid alibi, or so it seemed. Family members swore he had been in Louisiana at the time of the murder. And in court, that testimony was enough to set him free. But the web of evidence was closing in on Alvaro. His phone records placed him in contact with men he had no business knowing, figures in Louisiana tied to violent crimes, men who had no reason to be on his call log. The conversations had been brief, but frequent. And then, in the days leading up to Angela's death, they had stopped, as if there was no longer a need for discussion. The detectives brought Alvaro in for questioning. This time, they weren't asking. They were pushing. They confronted him with the bank records, the phone calls, the testimonies of those who had already started talking. Alvaro denied everything. He insisted he had nothing to do with his wife's murder, that he had been attacked just as he had said, that it was a tragic robbery, nothing more. But his alibi was falling apart, and so was his composure. His account of the night wavered under scrutiny. The details shifted. What had once been certainty became vague recollections, excuses, inconsistencies. His confidence faltered. And then, the final blow. Detectives confronted him with the life insurance policy. $1.5 million, recently adjusted, recently confirmed. A sum that, should Angela Caldwell no longer be in the picture, would belong solely to him. A policy that, to investigators, was not just a financial plan. It was a motive. On December 19, 1984, more than 3 months after Angela's murder, Alvaro Caldwell was arrested and charged with capital murder. The man who had spent years presenting himself as a devoted husband, a respected businessman, a community leader, was now facing the death penalty. As he sat in his cell awaiting trial, the reality of what lay ahead began to set in. He had spent months planning the perfect crime, but in the end, it had unraveled with every step he took. and the wife he had so carefully erased had left behind the evidence that would ultimately destroy him. By March of 1986, the weight of justice had finally caught up with Alvaro Caldwell. For months, the prosecution had gathered its case, constructing a damning narrative built on money trails, confessions, and the lies he had told in the wake of Angela's murder. Now he sat in the center of a courtroom, surrounded by strangers dissecting the most intimate details of his life. The man who had once carefully controlled his public image now had no control at all. The trial was set to last 6 weeks. A slow, methodical unraveling of every decision he had made, every word he had spoken, every action that had led to the moment Angela Caldwell's life had been taken. Prosecutors called witnesses, bankers, investigators, hired men who had already turned on him. The jury listened as phone records were laid out, as timelines were reconstructed, as the motivations became impossible to ignore. The most damning testimony came from Billy Wayne McKinnon, the former deputy who had played middleman in the murder-for-hire plot. Under oath, he explained how Alvaro had first approached him, how money had changed hands, how a life had been weighed against a dollar amount. McKinnon recounted the meetings, the expectations, the moment Alvaro had finally decided that waiting was no longer an option. And then, the hitman himself, Larry Thompson. Though he had been acquitted of murder charges, Thompson had since admitted to his role in the killing, knowing that double jeopardy would prevent him from ever being retried. His confession sent a ripple through the courtroom. He described the night in cold detail. The waiting, the moment Alvaro pulled into the rest stop, the gunshots, the silence. Throughout it all, Alvaro maintained his innocence. His demeanor in court was not one of a desperate man, but of a man who still believed he was in control. He listened intently, took notes, occasionally exchanged quiet words with his attorneys. But the performance was unraveling. There was no sympathy left for him. The jury saw him for what he was, not a grieving husband, but a man who had calculated his wife's death for financial gain. As the trial neared its conclusion, the defense attempted to cast doubt, to argue that Alvaro had been framed, that the men testifying against him were unreliable, that there was no direct evidence linking him to the murder. But it was too late. The prosecution had done its work. On March 5, 1986, after deliberating for just 6 hours, the jury returned its verdict. Guilty. The sentence was swift. Alvaro Caldwell was sentenced to death. The man who had orchestrated a life insurance killing, who had treated his wife's life as a financial inconvenience, was now condemned to die by lethal injection. His accomplices did not escape judgment either. Robert Cumber, the man who had introduced Alvaro to the hitman, received a life sentence. McKinnon, for his role in arranging the crime, was sentenced to 5 years in prison. And Larry Thompson, despite his later confession, remained behind bars for unrelated crimes. His next possible parole date, 2071. But the damage done extended beyond the courtroom. Alvaro's 3 sons, once shielded from the ugliness of their father's actions, were now faced with an impossible truth. Their mother was dead. Their father had put the plan in motion. Roby and Christopher, Alvaro's eldest sons, sat through the trial in silence, their faces hard, their eyes fixed on the man who had raised them. They heard the testimony, the evidence, the betrayals laid bare. And when the verdict was read, they did not flinch. To them, the justice system had done what was necessary. Alvaro Caldwell had made his choice, and now he would face the consequences. But for the youngest son, John, belief was not so easily abandoned. He had spent years idolizing his father, trusting in his version of events. To him, Alvaro was still the man who had tucked him in at night, the father who had taught him how to ride a bike. He could not reconcile that image with the man described in court. And so, long after the trial had ended, he remained Alvaro's last defender. As the years passed, Alvaro mounted appeal after appeal, searching for any weakness in the prosecution's case. He argued ineffective counsel, improper procedure, judicial bias. But each attempt ended the same way: denied. His time on death row stretched on, longer than expected. New Jersey had not carried out an execution since 1963, and Alvaro's case was caught in a legal limbo. He lived in a concrete cell with only the sound of distant voices and the clang of metal doors to remind him of the world outside. He spent his days writing, filing legal motions, grasping at anything that could undo what had already been sealed. In 2002, he wrote a book, Tunnel Vision, Trial and Error, a desperate attempt to reshape the narrative. He claimed he had been wronged by the system, that the case against him was built on unreliable witnesses and weak evidence. He pointed fingers at the investigators, at the attorneys, at the judge who had sentenced him. But no amount of words could erase the facts. In 2004, after years of legal battles, a federal judge ruled that Alvaro's original attorney had provided ineffective counsel during the sentencing phase. The decision overturned his death sentence, reducing it to life in prison. Prosecutors, weighing the cost of another drawn-out trial, declined to pursue the death penalty again. Instead, Alvaro was sentenced to life with the possibility of parole after 30 years. But time was not on his side. By 2014, the man who had once walked into court with unwavering confidence was no longer the same. A stroke had left him weakened, his speech slower, his body frail. And in early 2015, as the parole board prepared to hear his case, it became clear he would never leave prison, not by their decision, but by nature's. On February 21, 2015, Alvaro Caldwell died behind bars, his name forever linked to betrayal, greed, and the murder of the woman he once called his wife. His sons had made their choice, two of them severing ties, one holding on to hope until the very end. But the world did not mourn him. His story was not one of tragedy, but of justice served. Alvaro Caldwell had everything: a family, a career, a place in his community. But for him, it was never enough. He saw his wife not as a partner, but as an obstacle. He saw love as a transaction, life as something that could be measured in dollars. And in the end, his choices caught up with him. Angela Caldwell did not get a second chance. She did not get to see her children grow, to live the life that was stolen from her. But the man who orchestrated her murder spent decades behind bars, watching as his world collapsed, knowing that the freedom he once craved would never come. Justice was slow, but it was certain. And in the end, Alvaro Caldwell left this world not as a respected businessman, not as a devoted father, but as a cautionary tale of greed, deception, and the inevitable downfall of those who believe they can outsmart the truth. What do you think? Did justice prevail, or did Alvaro manipulate the system one last time? Let us know in the comments. And if you want more stories of crime, deception, and the investigations that bring killers to justice, subscribe and turn on notifications, because the truth is always waiting to be uncovered.